Warm welcome to everyone to our Clinical Strength in European Digital Health Analyst Briefing. We'll give everyone a few minutes to join as usual. Whilst they are joining, I would encourage you to start thinking through some of your questions as they relate to clinical evidence. We'll explain what we mean by clinical evidence in a minute. We will do our best to try and answer as many of your questions as we can over the next 30 to 40 minutes, depending on how many questions you've got. My name is Julian Salaberry. For some reason, the camera is showing you a blank room. I know where that is. No, I know where that is. I'm solving the technical glitch. There you go. It's called Apple Wizardry. My laptop's disappeared. I have to talk to my phone, which is still on my desk. So we'll give everyone a few minutes. People are starting to join. Good. Numbers going up slowly. Fantastic. So my name is Julian Salaberry. I am the CEO and the founder of Galen Growth. I'm speaking to you from Basel in Switzerland, which is where we have our European offices. Galen Growth, for those of you who don't know us, there's not many of you left, but there are a few, one or two, is the global leader in digital health data, intel, and insights. We're the preferred digital health innovation partner for pharmacos, medical device companies, insurance companies, consulting firms, pure tech companies, banks, and the list goes on. All these blue chip clients are subscribers to our platform, which powers all of our research, as well as, of course, rely on us as their trusted advisor for digital health. As I said, we have offices in Asia Pac, Singapore, in Basel, Switzerland, in Europe, and in Chicago for the US. We'll give you a few more minutes. The numbers are coming in slowly. So today's topic is the state of clinical evidence. Galen Growth took a point of view as we came out of 2021 and I guess continued weathering the pandemic, that the days of FOMO, days of raising vast amounts of funding as I did in 2021, based purely on a great story, were rapidly running out of momentum as essentially any stakeholder engaged with digital health was really looking for proof points. There are many proof points, reimbursement being one, for example, and as you know from your own experience, DiGA in Germany has certainly occupied a lot of limelight when it comes to governments putting in place a reimbursement mechanism for digital health. But the other one that we believe is as important, if not more important, is clinical evidence or clinical strength, as it says on your screen. And we embarked on an analysis last year of some 12,000 digital health ventures across the globe to understand what their clinical evidence is and was it noteworthy enough to actually be able to, where it's appropriate, take seriously. It's an annual report, so we will be refreshing this sometime during the course of 2022, date to be announced. But this is the 2023, the next version. This is the 2022 report. It is today an excerpt of the 60 plus pages of data and unmatched insights that are contained within the full report on clinical strength and digital health. And it's available to all our Health Tech Alpha users. The scope of the analysis, as usual for us, is digital health only in accordance with our taxonomy, which is now best in class and an industry reference point. It is 12,000 ventures that we had in those days on the platform. It's about 14,000 these days, so you can imagine the analysis will look quite different for 2023 when we refresh it. But it is a very strong baseline and indicator for clinical evidence in digital health across the globe. We only look at ventures that have been incorporated after the year 2002, and we're only looking at ventures that are private in this analysis. To walk us through those particular points, I've invited again Sarah, Dr. Schlachtenberg, our head of research and analytics for Europe and the US, who is the architect for this analysis. Now, it's important that people understand that the days of funding and headlines and reports that seem to attract a large audience every time should be really behind us. The glitter ball and the fanfare, noise, and ceremony about how much funding has been put in is really something that we need to put behind us as we focus on what truly is happening in digital health. After all, funding is really a lag measure. If there is no clinical strength, if there is no reimbursement pathways, if there is no quality leadership team, if there is no partnership with large pharma codes, for example, there will be no funding. And therefore, it's time that we started focusing on the core drivers of innovation in digital health. So let's start with clinical evidence as being one of those major proof points. Sarah, welcome, and thank you once again for bringing an important matter to life through numbers and no hype and no bias. But let me start with the obvious question, which is clinical evidence. What is it, and why does it matter to digital health?
That's a good question, because there are different definitions of clinical evidence, and we'll get into exactly how we measure it. But on a large scale, right, on the bird's eye view, clinical evidence is showing that, first of all, a venture is capable of medical grade development, because that's not to be taken for granted. As any of us know who have actually worked in that field, medical grade development is quite difficult. And it's proof of some sort of proof that the solution is bringing benefits to, and those are medical benefits, right, to a patient or to the user, right? So that can be done in different ways, and I'm going to get a little bit into why we have a broader definition, but it's really showing that the venture has medical grade evidence, and they're capable of bringing benefits to a patient.
So it's vital. It's absolutely vital that we or that digital health as an ecosystem, particularly the innovators and their teams, focus on this and get this right. Now, there's an awful lot of different ways of looking at clinical evidence, and there's an awful lot of data points that we should incorporate in this. So can you just walk us through, or help our audience understand, how we at Galen Growth are looking at clinical evidence? So how do we evaluate it? What do we include? And then therefore, how do we score digital venture to understand just whether it is relevant or not relevant?
Yeah, exactly. At some point, then we had to say, okay, how do we look at this, and how do we actually put a number to it? And so at Galen Growth, we have what's called an evidence signal, right? And that is composed of three pieces. First of all, very clearly, clinical trials, right? If a venture has performed or applied for a clinical trial, has been accepted for a clinical trial, it's clear that they're moving forward towards the development of evidence, and that they have a device or a solution that is safe to a patient. And regulatory filing then comes with that, right? If they have the regulatory filing anywhere across the globe, right? We don't just look at the US, of course, we look at European notified bodies, as well as many of the Asian regulatory bodies. And those are two clinical trials regulatory filings, quite clear. If you have one of those two pieces, then you're on a good path to really solid evidence that your solution does have bring a medical benefit. Now, in addition, we look at peer-reviewed journal articles, and they're very important, is that it is a peer-reviewed article, not a white paper, not just a journal article that's been written. It has been verified by peers that it does have a solid medical basis. It is done with a critical methodology to show that the venture itself is capable of generating some sort of solid argument towards generating evidence. Now, we haven't weighted those three evenly. I would find that a bit strange. What we've done is looked at the evidence signal. In order to develop that evidence signal, we can say, okay, if the signal is 0, then there's no clinical strength. They don't have any of these three pieces, right? Puzzle pieces. If you have 20, then you're starting to build clinical strength, and that's with then peer-reviewed journal articles, right? You're starting to write articles and build some sort of confidence that your solution brings benefit. Now, once you reach 40 which is with several journal articles, or you have one regulatory filing or a clinical trial, then there's an establishment of some sort of clinical strength, right? And so that's our scoring methodology. It's not incredibly complex, but this is the way that we understand, okay, this venture has sufficient evidence that they have a clinical strength.
Okay, so 40 is the number to look out for.
That is.
And so we'll come back to that in a minute. So let's start with some global context to give everybody a point to anchor into when we look at Europe in more detail. So if we look at it at a global level, what does clinical evidence look like when it's broken down to its, I guess, its global components? And whilst we're looking at that, can any digital health venture become clinical evidence sort of significant?
It's a good question. My simple answer is no. It depends on what category, what cluster, right? At the Galen Growth, we have a very strict taxonomy for understanding what the product is, where the particular venture plays in within digital health, and depending on that taxonomy, and if you download the full report, you'll see we have the ventures broken down by therapeutic areas as well as digital health categories, and show you which categories and which clusters, right, need clinical evidence, right? Are they heaviest? If you're looking at medical device or connected devices, if you're looking at diagnostics, solutions, or digital therapeutics, of course, you have to have evidence. But there are definitely ventures that are building this evidence, and that's what we're showing then. If we look globally at all the global digital health ventures, the private ventures, right, 7% of them have indeed already applied for or run clinical trials. 9% have regulatory filings and 10% have peer-reviewed publications, right? So if you're not generating that evidence, and if you're within one of the clusters and therapeutic areas that requires it, then you're definitely falling behind.
Yeah, but it's a story that builds, I guess, particularly if we do get some more serious tones in digital health going forwards, where the myriad of wannabe investors stop trying to get all excited about funding and start focusing really on what is digital health delivering to patients, to humankind. So I presume it's a positive picture if we look at how clinical evidence has progressed in the globe.
Absolutely. First of all, there are more digital ventures. It's a growing area. But looking at just the evidence, right? Those three pieces of evidence that we talked about over 2012 to 2022, that generation of evidence is growing at a very rapid pace, which is what you see on the bar chart. The growth of how fast or how much evidence is being generated on a yearly basis. So it's definitely a very positive trend, and the ventures as they mature are stepping up and generating that evidence.
Which is, I think it's very positive, and it means that some people are getting the message and are really focusing on making sure that the right investments are happening within digital ventures to prove medically that they are able to make a difference at a patient level. Okay, so we're looking at digital health insights. I mean, essentially, Galen Growth is the only digital health firm able to look at and track and monitor digital health activity in the 5 key regional ecosystems of the world, Asia Pac, Middle East, Israel, Europe, North America, South America. There's nobody in the world that can do that. So let's take that opportunity to help our audience understand, what does CE look like, clinical evidence, look like in each one of these regional ecosystems, not just North America, which tends to be what everybody writes about. There's other stuff going on in other regions. So what does it look like? Right.
Well, if we take all of that evidence, right, all the publications, the clinical trials, and regulatory approvals globally, 52% of those are in North America. So talking about the US and is definitely very relevant, but that doesn't mean it's not relevant in other parts of the world, right? Of that evidence, Europe has a significant portion. I can't read here how many, 25%, and 16% in APAC, 6% in the Middle East, right? And the Middle East is a very small region, right? They actually do have. I'm getting there. Oh, they actually do have a very high percentage of ventures raising clinical evidence, but you see the pie chart here with the regional distribution of the evidence.
Sure.
If we go and look at the ventures, right, with the evidence, you can see there. That's where you see the picture with the Middle East. There, 20% of all ventures have the established clinical strength, right? It's just slightly less for Europe, the North America, and then APAC is 13%, and South America is much lower. Right, so it's really a global picture. It looks good. 20% of ventures do have the established clinical strength. You talked about ventures growing and developing that. In the analysis, you'll see we do talk about on a median, ventures are about 7 years old before they can start generating that clinical evidence. So it's a matter of growth and developing that.
And if we dig into Europe at 19%, and who are the leading lights there?
Yeah, as far as the percentage of ventures within a particular country that have established clinical strength, the UK has the most ventures with established clinical strength. They also have the most the greatest volume of ventures, but you can see 27% there are the ventures in the UK do have this established clinical strength. All right, and you'll see some other names in Europe. If you go across that bar chart, France having 22%, right? Sweden 19%. So Europe is very strong when it comes to ventures with clinical strength.
Good, and we'll come back to that in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
I was looking at the partners, in other words, those organizations in Europe generally across the globe, that were the most prolific when it came to building partnerships with digital ventures that had that magic 40+ number in relation to their clinical evidence. And bizarrely enough, I noticed that the top 5 in the world, in terms of measured by number of partnerships, all happen to be headquartered in Europe, which is interesting, isn't it? A mixture of government as well as government, sure. A mixture of health systems as well as corporations. So I thought I'd drill into one, AstraZeneca, if I may, which is in the middle of the pack. So if we look at AstraZeneca, what does their portfolio kind of look like? If we look at their portfolio through the lens of that clinical evidence,
we can within the report that's broken down at least for the top 3, right? Looking at 44% of their ventures do have established clinical strength, right, within their partnership portfolio. So really, they do look for ventures that have the established clinical strength, or it's very, very oftentimes the venture partners with a pharma company in order to develop the clinical evidence, because it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of resources in order to do that, right? With average alpha score of 67, they're looking at the established ventures, right? And 76% of their ventures are within those top 5 clusters that require clinical evidence, right? So if we're looking across their portfolio, right, you can see some of the names of who they are partnering with within the different regions, right? AstraZeneca is a very strong, is a leader as far as choosing ventures with strong clinical strength.
It's encouraging to see, and of course some of the other actors there are similar sort of mindset, but it is great to see that we're starting to see that focus coming through from some of these key players. It'd be nice to see some of the other verticals such as insurance and etc. sign a bubble as well, but let's see how we go. Listen, let's drill into Europe whilst we still have time to do so, which is obviously the core focus of this particular analyst briefing. So we look at Europe, what percentage of digital ventures then have established clinical evidence, and how has this been trending?
Indeed, absolutely. 19% is the number you're asking for. They do have that established, they've crossed that magic number of 40, as far as either having one clinical trial, one regulatory filing, or 4 peer-reviewed publications. 4% are on their way. They're working on establishing that evidence, and 77% haven't yet gotten there. Or perhaps they don't need it if they're in something like a medical education or online support groups, right? Although there, you can definitely argue that an online support group should be generating evidence that it's providing a medical benefit. On the right, you see that that growth of ventures, right? The cumulative number of ventures with the evidence saving greater than 40 is going up at a very fast pace. This report was generated in, what was that? I think September, and therefore we didn't have all 2022 yet. But again, we will be republishing this year in order to show the full picture of 2022. right? So Europe, it looks good. They're definitely on their way for improving the clinical evidence that digital ventures have.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the whole point of this is that we've baselined it with the analysis we did in 2022. We're trying to create that focus on its importance to digital health, and therefore, this is the core objective of these type of conversations as we have them elsewhere around the world. For example, at ViVE in Nashville in the US at the end of this month, myself and Lawrence will be looking at what US is doing when it comes to digital health and clinical evidence, because it is one of the fundamental drivers of the validation of innovation in digital health. Looking at funding, only briefly, very keen to understand if there is a correlation between funding and clinical evidence in Europe.
I would say there's somewhat of correlation. What you see on the right there, the early stage Series A, Series B, Series C ventures, right? As they move through the different funding stages, they do indeed establish more clinical evidence, right? That share of ventures goes up. Now, what you'll see is the Series D and beyond, the ones that have gone public or been acquired. The Series D and beyond doesn't necessarily correlate, right? So if there's not a requirement in order to move to the next funding round that you have clinical evidence, but there's very strong evidence that it does increase as the funding rounds go through. And as you mentioned before, Julian, right now, this is the picture when funding was still abundant, right? In 2020, 2021. Now they were jumping into 2020. We've had 2022 under our belts. We know funding is no longer abundant, and it's going to be very important that the ventures generate some sort of evidence.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I'm looking forward to see how this tracks. But I guess it's that lead measure which should be driving the funding lag measure. Right. With a little bit of time left, we don't yet have any questions, although I would encourage people with us today to ask their questions. This is only a snapshot of the overall report, but we're happy to answer questions. You're preempting me with your slide, which is great, because it's exactly where I wanted us to go, which is, okay, let's look at what does, typical is the wrong word, but let's say, what does a venture that has achieved that significant clinical evidence threshold and above look like? If you deep dive into that particular venture. And there, we picked one from France, we picked one from Sweden, one from the United Kingdom, one from Sweden, and one from Germany. But of course, there are examples in each of the country ecosystems across Europe. Pick the one you want to dive into first, but let's take a little time just to look at what does a digital venture kind of look like. One that has that clinical evidence threshold passed. Yeah,
the first thing that you should look at is, of course, the primary category, right? What kind of products are they developing here with medical imaging, digital therapeutics? You have to have evidence that your solution works. You can't put a digital therapeutic on the market without saying it doesn't harm the patient. It actually brings a medical benefit to the patient if it's a prescription digital therapeutic, that is. Of course, you look, the maturity score is about 50 for all of them, which means they have established at least one product. We have the distribution. So throughout Europe, you do have all the countries and ventures everywhere really generating strong evidence. I'm going to go ahead, as you mentioned, and I have to, get out of the presentation mode, look at Amor Medical, just as an example, right? We can open that up in...
Please, yeah. We have a question as well, but keep going.
We can open it up in Health Tech Alpha, and and look at that in detail. In fact, what you see is on the Health Tech Alpha platform, in each profile, the depth of the profile we have includes those three tabs: the regulatory, clinical, and publications tab, right? Understanding Amor Medical has indeed is recruiting, right? Has applied for clinical trials. And in fact, they do have regulatory approval, I believe, for at least one device, two devices, one device, two different approvals, probably for different indications, and therefore we can assume they have generated that evidence and they do have a product that's bringing a medical benefit, right? If we look at the overview part of the venture signals, evidence signal is very high. They also have peer-reviewed publications, and it's a Swedish venture, right? That's focused on B2B, so selling their solutions to the hospitals and to the medical centers for medical imaging purposes. I believe it's an AI. They use AI to assist looking at the imaging and identifying or diagnosing the diseases. So it's just an example of what's going on and how we can use Health Tech Alpha and, in fact, to get a very deep picture of what's going on for that particular venture.
Yeah, I mean, showing the data, of course, that we leverage in order to perform the evaluation and therefore arrive at a score for the venture, which is then visible on the left-hand side of your screens under evidence signal, so as to help our users, our subscribers, be able to start filtering out, screening out ventures that have insufficient clinical evidence, which is massively important, of course, if you are a pharmaco trying to take a solution to patients, for example, a sort of diagnosis solution where clinical evidence is critical, absolutely critical. Question from Peter Domican, who is asking, I guess, what are the areas where it's easiest to obtain clinical evidence versus most difficult?
There's absolutely no way to say what's easier and what's more difficult as far as areas, right? Because if you're writing a peer-reviewed publication, as many of you know who may have written a publication, it requires solid evidence and solid methodology, right? Of course, anything that doesn't require a clinical trial or regulatory approval, perhaps you can consider to be easier, or at least less funding intensive. Of course, those two things require a lot of funding in order to get there. So I can't say that any area is easier than the others, but perhaps the amount of money needed to get there could be difficult. And that's the whole point of the partnerships, as we talked about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess you touched on in the beginning, there are categories of digital health where clinical evidence is not really required. And therefore you could probably put them in the bucket of easier. But in terms of how we are measuring clinical evidence and that combination of clinical trials as well as regulatory filings, the regulatory approvals, etc., then the bar of difficulty is increasing. Peer review publications, I guess technically anyone could do those. Running a clinical trial is hard, but also requires cash. So that's already a hard bar to cross, so to speak. And of course, regulatory filing anyone can make, but regulatory approval is quite hard in terms of you are really at the beck and call of a regulator, FDA in the US, etc. I mean, all these things our audience knows well. So I guess there's thresholds of difficulty within achieving, I guess, a data point in each of those categories that ultimately calculate a clinical evidence score down the road. And of course, the more an organization such as Digital Venture does it, I guess the more proficient they become at achieving an outcome in each of those dimensions.
Absolutely. But as someone who's focused on digital health, right, something like an online health community, right, I expect that they do develop evidence that their solution is bringing a benefit, and that can be quite difficult. And to really collect that evidence, right, to develop some sort of study. It's not a clinical trial, but it is a study, and it has to be very medically sound study to show that, hey, this online community is bringing a benefit to patients, and that's why it should be used by the healthcare community.
Cool. Do you want to take us look at another venture very quickly? We had three there. We've got a bit of time. I mean, there's no other questions at the moment. If you do have any questions, please feel free to ask. We're happy to answer.
I can. Very happy to. Let's jump to
the UK one.
UK.
Yeah.
I'll let open it separate. Very good. I have an extra step here. I have to click on login. If you click on any of the links in the report and you don't have yet an account, please sign up so that you can get that information. Brainomix, another medical imaging venture who has the therapeutic focus areas of cardiovascular, stroke, oncology, and pulmonology. Right, understanding it's a AI powered software solution looking in medical imaging, right? And we can look here at the partnerships, right? We and particularly how have the partnerships developed over the last couple of years. Looking at they do talk about partnerships on their website that haven't been announced in some sort of news publication, but when you have a news announcement about that publication, about that partnership in particular, they've been very active in the last 2 years, in 2022, 2021, right? Interacting with both universities, organizations, and Boehringer Ingelheim, so pharma, in order to get their solution onto the market, get that evidence, right? The early ones with the university and the pharma companies generating the evidence in order to get their solution through evidently here, I didn't look in advance, FDA approvals for their image processing software, right? So that's what Brainomix has been up to, and their solution is then available both in Europe and in the UK and in the US.
Yep. Lavinia is asking us a question. She says, what about the stage of the clinical evidence gathered, e.g. clinical trial phase, or the results of the clinical evidence? Are these represented in any way or factored into the scoring?
At the moment, we don't factor in the stage of that clinical trial, right? Well, we do if it has been rejected, right? If you've applied for a clinical trial and it has been rejected or it has been stopped, then we don't include it in the scoring, right? Because then
so we're looking at an ultimate outcome as opposed to something in progress, because work in progress could end with a negative or a positive outcome for that particular venture. So at this stage, we're staying close to a definitive final outcome, so that there is a measurable point. Not sure I follow, Lavinia. You're asking what about results? You're talking about what about the results of the clinical trial?
My Q&A.
Sorry, yes, it's in the Q&A. Are these quantified in a qualitative way? The results. I presume she's referring to clinical trials.
Yeah, probably. I mean, if you have the clinical trial and then you click and see that there is a regulatory approval followed it, then you can assume that the clinical trial was successful and it moved on to the next step as to actually being approved. But as far as the outcomes of the clinical trials, that's not represented because that's oftentimes right, the adverse effects or any sort of outcome of that clinical trial isn't typically publicly announced unless it was successful. So if you see the news, if you see a news article about a successful clinical trial, then that's what you can conclude.
Sure. So we're pretty binary on that one. It's either successful, it's not successful. We don't take a halfway point in a clinical trial, or we don't take a particular pro rata in terms of the outcomes of the response rate of patients.
Right. We look at if it was completed, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And if it was stopped because of any sort of a danger to the patient, then we can assume it wasn't successful.
Cool. Thank you very much for that. Thanks for all your questions. Any others, please feel free to ask, but we are slowly reaching the point of the end of this analyst briefing as agreed with you in terms of the time it would take up in your calendar. So thank you very much for that. Again, this is a snapshot of the full report. Feel free to go to Health Tech Alpha and look at our repository of thematic reports to access the report itself. If you don't have an account, you can create a free account by just going to www.healthtechalpha.com. And again, once you've created your account, go to the report repository to access the report. You'll also find a lot of other reports there. You'll find, for example, our regional deep dive reports that we publish at the beginning of each year, where we literally drill into the key trends of Asia Pacific, of the Middle East, of Europe, of North America, and of South America. And sometime in the course of this year, we'll be looking at adding Africa to the list. Everything we do is powered by HealthTech Alpha. So the 300 million data points that sit in HealthTech Alpha drive our analysis so that we ensure that we remain objective and we eliminate all hype and bias in our analysis and our interpretation of the trends in digital health. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to us either via LinkedIn, where you'll find either myself or Sarah, or directly via email at info@gaminggrowth.com. But pending any other last-minute questions, Sarah, thank you very much for your time in bringing us a bit closer to clinical evidence and the importance of clinical evidence to the future of digital health. And a big thank you to our audience today and their questions. It's always a pleasure to get questions, and it's always a pleasure to be able to answer them as best we can. Thank you for your time, and wishing everyone a great rest of their day.